Hey y'all, I'm Taylor Lynch.
And I'm Ryan Nix. And we're your hosts for Pure Malice, a true crime podcast where innocence ends and malice begins.
Hold on, my ear itches. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Let's just stop production because Taylor's ear itches.
It's a major thing.
Oh.
I want to hear it. I can't help somebody didn't record last time we spent an hour.
It was more like 2 to 2.5 hours. It was your bad internet. Before we dive into today's case, I want to make a quick correction from part 1. We were wondering if it's common practice for ranchers or livestock owners in general to just leave a carcass to rot in the pasture after it dies. So we did a little digging and we reached out to a friend of ours, Matthew May. He is a rancher right here in Texas and the owner of Cattle Company based in Salado. According to Matthew, leaving livestock to decompose out in the open is definitely not best practice. He says that at the very least, the animal should be moved away from the rest of the livestock, and ideally, it should be buried. He also shared a great quote from Temple Grandin that we really liked, so we're going to share it. The quote says, "I think using animals for food is an ethical thing to do, but we've got to do it right. You've got to give those animals a decent life, and you've got to give them a painless death. We owe the animal respect." So Matt runs Cattle Company, where they not only raise high-quality beef cattle, but also make tallow-based products like lotion, lip balm, and soap, all made from tallow rendered from their own cattle. He also sells whole and half cows, and let me tell you, his beef is seriously good.
I'm really glad that you asked Matt about that because there's differences between hunting practices and farming practices. So I'm glad that he was able to clarify some of that for us just because we weren't really sure. And the other thing that I really love is that you brought up tallow. So for me, I love tallow. I recently really got into the tallow products. I was listening to some podcasts and it talks about people using only tallow products on their face, right? And at this point, I think I've 100% bought into it just because of the anti-aging qualities. It helps with scarring, which I have scars on my face. It also helps with acne-prone skin, sensitive skin, and then, of course, it has a natural antimicrobial benefit. I'm still doing a lot of research on it, but the one thing that I loved about it was just all the hydration factors to it. It has tons of vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, making it a powerhouse for dry skin because my skin is not only super sensitive, but extremely dry too. It helps with eczema, fine lines, wrinkles, all the things. It's an amazing product. So I love the fact that we were able to bring that up and talk about tallow because it's one of my favorite things right now.
So if you're in the market for any of what I just mentioned, you can visit their Facebook page, Cattle Company, and see what all they offer.
Okay, let's go. Let's get into it.
If you tuned in to the last episode, then you know that we are covering the Texas killing fields. In case you missed the last episode, I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick recap. So we went over the economy and the growth in the Houston and the Galveston area that was taking place in the 1970s and the 80s. We talked about some of the missing girls and the victims found in the early 70s, like Debbie Ackerman, Maria Johnson, Colette Wilson, Gloria Gonzalez, and Brenda Jones. We talked about the 4 victims, Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, Jane Doe, and Janet Doe, that were found at Calder Road Fields between 1983 and 1991. And we walked you through the location of the area known as Calder Road Fields, which is the location that kickstarted the investigation that led to what we now call the Texas killing fields. We went over 2 of the main suspects for the Calder Road Field killings, which were Clyde Hedrick and Robert Abel. We discussed Tim Miller and how he started EquiSearch through the loss of his own daughter. Another important thing that we covered was the way that law enforcement and the medical examiner's office handled these cases and the evidence along the way, and the lack of communication between the jurisdictions and departments about cases. So now that we're all caught up, let's pick up where we left off.
So it's important to keep in mind that these cases all unfolded over a series of decades. None of it's cut and dry. It's very spread out. And so it was a little difficult to put all the things together. Anyways, years go by and no advancements on any of the cases have been made, and more girls go missing off of I-45. And that brings us to 12-year-old Laura Smithers. She loved ballet. She was last seen on April 3rd of 1997 in Friendswood, Texas, about 9 miles northwest of Calder Road Fields. She told her mother she was going to go for a short run, but she never made it back home. Her parents were making pancakes and expected her back. So when she didn't get back after an hour, they proceeded to call the police department to report that she was missing. Her mother, Gay, also called neighbors, friends, and family to come help search for their daughter, and she spent days passing out flyers. So, up until this time, Friendswood was considered a safe town and an overall safe place to live. In fact, it was said to be one of the safest places to live in the nation. It had that small town feel, and many people admitted that they didn't even lock their doors sometimes, and people in the town had formed a tight knit community. When Laura Smithers went missing, there was a massive public outcry, and it seems that because of that public outcry, police took this missing case seriously. With other victims in the past, police were quick to state the girls were runaways, but not this time. Now, be mindful this is a different town, a different area than League City where the Calder Road cases took place, but I personally think a lot of what went on and a lot of the tension it got was also because of the age. So I think age played a huge factor. Remember, she's 12 years old. So you have a safe community where a 12-year-old's going for a run on her street, a typical nothing happens in this small town, tight-knit community, and all of a sudden you have a 12-year-old just up and gone. So the Friendswood police, Harris County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI all got involved very heavily in this case very quickly. So over 6,000 people came together and helped assist in the different searches by foot, car, boat, horseback, you name it, they had them out there. I think this goes to prove like in Texas, Texas is just a different state in my opinion. I want to, share love to all states, but Texas is better. I'll say it, like, especially with recent tragedies that occurred recently with all the floods and children and all these things, like, that is one thing that Texas never shies away from, like, taking care of their own, going in, offering time and money and resources to help support looking for these people, especially when it comes to children being involved. We're seeing that right now.
Okay, so pause. I'm really glad that you brought that up. So 2 weeks ago was the 4th of July.
Happy Independence Day, America.
Happy belated 4th of July to everyone. We hope you had a great holiday. Now, being that we live in Texas, whenever summer arrives, a lot of Texans spend their summers floating the rivers. And that may sound super redneck to someone who's never done it before, but it's actually a really good time. You get your group together, you pack down your cooler, you go and you rent your tubes, and then you load onto a bus and they shuttle you to your drop off spot. And then you pop the top to a cold one, jump in the water, turn up your music, and it's just fun. Well, this is exactly what many Texans were doing this 4th of July. Unfortunately, this summer it turned tragic very quickly for so many. A destructive and deadly flood took place in the Texas Hill Country. During the flood, water levels along the Guadalupe River rose rapidly, and as a result, at least 145 fatalities have been confirmed as of July 17th, and about 102 people are reported missing. The Guadalupe River rose 26 foot in about 45 minutes. It surged an estimated 29 feet in the Hunt area, where more than 20 children were declared missing from a summer camp. And July 5th, we saw more flash flood warnings for the Lake Travis area, which is part of the Colorado River watershed. In the span of just a few hours, the equivalent to 4 months worth of rain fell across the Texas Hill Country region, with the highest rain totals being 20.33 inches. The flood was the deadliest inland flooding event in the United States since the 1976 Big Thompson River flood, surpassing flooding from Hurricane Helen in 2024. So, to everyone affected by this, you are all in our thoughts.
Yeah. And I mean, not just George Strait, a lot of professional athletes that are from Texas
Really showed up. Yeah, they did.
this was one of those cases where a lot of people showed up and showed out, and they wanted to help support and show that they loved and cared for this community. And so that makes a difference in a case like this. It makes a difference when you have a response like that. Every missing person deserves that. Unfortunately, it just isn't always the case. And you see that. So Laura's community really showed up for her and her family. On April 20th of 1997, 17 days after her disappearance, Laura Smithers' body was found in a retention pond in Pasadena, Texas. So 17 miles from Friendswood. Locals followed the smell of what they assumed was a dead animal at the time, but it in fact ended up being Laura Smithers' decomposing body. So they were initially able to identify her through a silver ring she wore that had her initials on it, but further identified by dental records. She became one of at least 35 unsolved cases in a 3-county area at the time. And I'm throwing that out there just for perspective. So in this case, Laura was portrayed as a good girl who came from a good family, lived in a nice neighborhood. So this is the first time you actually see that drastic change and how law enforcement responds. So there was a much higher presence and pressure that was placed on this. It put law enforcement on the radar. The public wanted information about this case. Yeah. And so that made them really react quickly, which made them rule this incident a homicide quickly instead of holding on to that. So Friendswood ISD was so panicked, they started the next year by handing out child identification kits, which were created by the Laura Recovery Center, which was a nonprofit established by Laura Smithers' parents to aid in the search and recovery of missing victims.
So this is something that you really started seeing a lot in like the 80s, early 90s, ways that parents could identify their children.
You really did see that. It was extremely popular in late 80s, early 90s, but it was really popular, you're right. But each case there came a different form of identification that was leaned into so strongly. So, from fingerprinting to swabbing to dental records to hair, every kit was just a little different. There was handwriting kits that I can remember as a kid, like having to do. So it was great. I don't think you see that as often now as you did back then. So these specific kits included information about how to report your child missing, fingerprinting them, and saving DNA swabs, and also locks of hair. So this was a really smart thing at the time with all the missing people cases in the area, but just across the board, it was, something good to have just in case. So meanwhile, the local law enforcement put together a list of local sex offenders in Galveston and Harris County, including some of the nearby areas, and they ended up with a list of over 2,100 people.
Ba, ba, ba.
Yeah, that's a ton. So a few months after Laura Smithers disappeared, Kellyanne Cox, a 20-year-old mother and student of the University of North Texas, went missing on July 15th of 1997. She was last seen at a convenience store in Denton, Texas. Okay. Store in Denton, Texas. She had locked herself out of her car and used the gas station payphone to call her boyfriend. She was headed to tour the city jail with her criminal justice class.
And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's like praying on your wedding day.
Okay, encore.
Yep.
Anyways, so police searched her car but couldn't find any evidence of foul play and were unable to confirm that the crime had even been committed. So fast forward about a month later, 17-year-old Jessica Lee Kane disappears from Clear Lake, Texas.
Okay, so just really quickly, I want to take some time to point out to those of you who may not be familiar with Texas or with I 45 that obviously Texas is the biggest state, right? Right. It takes about 12 to 14 hours, give or take, to drive from one side to the other. And I 45 connects the cities of Dallas and Galveston while also passing through Houston. Specifically, it runs from North Dallas through Houston and terminates in Galveston. It is a major north south route within the state, and it's the only major interstate highway that stays entirely within Texas. So,
Yeah. So she was last seen at Bennigan's restaurant at Baybrook Mall where she went with some of her friends and left around 1:30 a.m. Her father found her truck abandoned alongside I-45 with her purse still inside.
which is like never a good sign, right?
Yeah. So at this point, reports her missing. Luckily, there was a massive community search, which can be credited largely to Tim Miller and Bob and Gay Smither. But both Kelly and Jessica's bodies were not found. And there was still a question of if Laura Smithers, Kelly Ann Cox, and Jessica Kane were connected to the Calder Road killings. So now police did consider the possibility, but there was no actual evidence that they could find to connect the killer to their crimes. And there was a significant gap in time between when the last Calder Road Fields victim was discovered and when Jessica, Laura, and Kelly went missing. So police had thousands of potential suspects at the time. Meanwhile, Robert Abel was also still a suspect in the Calder Road Fields killings. At this point, they have no evidence that points to one specific person, so they're just going off of the profile given to them by the FBI profile. If you remember that one?
Mhm.
So at this point, they're going with that FBI profiler's profile and going through the list of sex offenders. So too much time is passing between when the girls go missing and when the remains are found to be able to collect evidence that's deemed usable. So, other than the cases that the evidence that they had lost, and like we had mentioned earlier, the elements in the area that affects the DNA and the evidence that were collected. For years, Tim Miller believed that Robert Abel was his daughter's killer and continued to search for his daughter in those fields with cadaver dogs and heavy machinery, looking for any evidence that could be used to help in his daughter's case or any of the other victims' cases as well. He did at one point end up uncovering a purse and women's clothing, but they were never able to connect them to any of the victims.
So, definitely some odd items, but nothing that connected him.
Yeah, like nothing. So Robert eventually ended up filing for an order of protection to keep Tim away from him. By Tim's own admission, he had once held a gun to Robert's head and consistently harassed him because he was convinced that Robert killed his daughter.
That's like super intense.
Yep. By this time, Robert Abel had definitely become the villain of his community, and it was extremely hard for him. He ended up shutting down his trail riding business and he moved back to his family ranch in another county in Texas. So by the summer of 1997, no one had been arrested in the murders of the Calder Road Fields cases. At this time, almost every local law enforcement officer, including the FBI, had investigated the case and were sharing information, but still coming up short with nothing. So things took a major turn in May of 1997 when a call came in to the emergency services saying that a 19-year-old Sandra Sapow had been abducted in a convenience store parking lot. Ring a bell? So, according to her, a strange man approached her and said, "Hey, you have a flat tire." Then he pulled a knife on her and basically told her to get in the truck and not to scream. He ended up taking her down the highway and she ended up jumping out of his truck onto the freeway and survived.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
That's that fight or flight right there. So she did suffer pretty severe injuries, but she was able to escape her abductor. There were eyewitnesses that saw her jump from the truck, and they were able to give details about the vehicle itself and that it was heading northbound on I-45. She went to the hospital, and when the police took her statement, she told the police, "I'd rather jump out of the truck and kill myself than him doing whatever he was planning to do. So I jumped."
I don't blame her.
So to me, like, it's a crazy story that you're like, "No, this would never happen," but it happened. And it happened to her, and so her story is one of survival, and she is super lucky to be alive, and, that plays a big part in this too. So, she gave police as much detail as she possibly could, and while she didn't catch the license plate, she was able to relay the make and model of the truck that was used. So, it was a white Ford Dually pickup truck, and not only was she able to describe the inside of the truck, she was able to give them a description of the man who kidnapped her. So she said he was a 40-year-old white male with brown or dirty blonde hair, a receding hairline,
Ha! I love that she put that in there.
bags under his eyes, and he was wearing a black cowboy hat. Police were able to put a sketch together, and many people began wondering if this man was the killer they've been looking for so long. So Sandra later identified a man named William Lewis Reese from a police lineup. William, who was known as Bill, but we're going to refer to him as Reese. Reese worked in local construction, and the police noticed that he was a registered sex offender in Oklahoma. So he was a registered sex offender in Oklahoma, and he had recently got out of prison after serving time for not only one, but two sexual assaults. So if you look at the sketch that Sandra worked with the police to put together, it looked a lot like Reese. So they did do a really good job with that. So the police were immediately able to get a search warrant for Reese's home and truck, and they were able to find the black cowboy hat that Sandra had described. They just didn't find much else. So they ended up arresting him for the kidnapping and the attempted murder of Sandra. Police noticed that he had worked on a construction project for new subdivisions that were very close to where Laura Smithers lived. And it turned out that the day that Laura Smithers went missing, Reese was let out of work early. So his foreman said, due to rain coming, go home. And the investigators actually theorized that he saw Laura running while driving his truck and somehow lured her into his truck. So this would have been about a month before abducting Sandra. So he soon became the prime suspect in the Laura Smithers case and also became a suspect in the Calder Road Fields killings. According to the FBI, it's extremely rare to have two Carl.
Okay, time for serious voice again.
Serial killers in close proximities committing crimes at the same time. And it was confirmed that William was in prison during a time of the earlier Calder Road Field killings, but police did suspect him of being the predator in the disappearance of Jessica Kane.
Wait, they never actually found Jessica Kane's body, though, right?
Yes. So that was the only thing. Jessica Kane's body had still not been discovered, and it proved difficult to put a murder investigation together without the body.
One can only assume.
So in police interviews, Reese claimed it was all set up and that he had never met any of the girls he was being accused of killing. As for Laura Smithers' case, prosecutors decided they did not have enough evidence to charge him with murder, but this didn't stop Laura Smithers' parents from making their presence known while in court for the kidnapping of Sandra Sapal. So Reese was later convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 60 years in prison. So I want you guys to remember this case for later because we're going to talk about him again. Okay?
Self-care isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. At Vital Flow Aesthetics and Wellness, they believe in helping you look and feel your absolute best. Whether you're looking for a rejuvenating medical-grade facial, Botox, fillers, or help on your weight loss journey, their expert team is there to enhance your natural beauty with personalized care. Ready to glow from the inside out? Book your appointment today at Vital Flow Aesthetics and Wellness and experience the confidence you deserve. Located inside Tejas Urgent Care in Mejia, Texas. Call or text now to book your appointment at 254-310-7131. Again, that's 254-310-7131. The information shared in this podcast or on this website is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The host will not be held responsible for any misled interpretations of this content. The opinions and views expressed are those of the host and guest and should not be considered advice. We cannot guarantee the accuracy of any statements from guests or the sufficiency of the information.
For the Calder Road Fields killings, Reese was ruled out because he was in prison at the time, so the police continued to focus on Robert Abel. So, if you recall, this was the man they named in the public affidavit without any evidence linking him as the killer. He also is the one that we talked about closing down his business and moving to a different county. So, he was still very known to many in the town as the serial killer and still is to this day in League City. He was quoted to say that they ruined his life.
Oh, yeah, they absolutely did.
So in July of 2005,
Correction.
2005, Robert's golf cart was on the train tracks as a nearby train came through and he was killed. So this accident, it was, unclear if it was accident for real or if it was an actual suicide attempt that was successful. So after Robert Abel passed away, police still had their eye on Clyde Hedrick, who, if you recall from part one, was actually accused of abuse to a corpse in the Ellen Beeson case. He had built a long list of criminal offenses by the early 2000s, which included assault, evading arrest, terroristic threat, DWI, criminal trespassing, possession, enticing a child, theft, criminal mischief, and attempted arson.
Nothing major. Just building his resume for the mob.
So in 2011, Clyde's ex wife actually approached authorities saying that he had frequently made incriminating remarks against Ellen Beeson's death back in 1996.
We're gonna party like it's
1999. Oh, anyway, so we're not going to go to 1999. We're actually going to go back to 1996. Medical examiners not from the county had defleshed the skull and noticed that Ellen had suffered severe skull fractures that were not found within the original autopsy. So, forensic anthropologist Dr. Gil King determined the fractures were caused by blunt force trauma, making this a homicide. Another examiner, Dr. Kraus, also confirmed it was homicide caused by blunt force trauma. So now you have two people saying, hey, this isn't what it seemed at first. We've looked at it further, we've uncovered more, and this was actually homicide by blunt force trauma. So the remains were then sent back to Galveston to the Galveston County Medical Examiner, which was Dr. Korndorfer, and the man who actually originally examined her. He, however, stuck to his original determination and claimed that the fracture in her skull may have been caused well after the death, saying that there was no fracture originally, even though he had not actually defleshed the skull before his examination, although he claimed he did. So, photos that were taken by Dr. Gil King do not collaborate that he did, in fact, deflesh the skull. So, someone in this whole thing is not telling the truth. But regardless, the work on this case had been at a stop for many, many years. So, now we're going to fast forward from 1996 to 2011. This is when the FBI reopens the case, and with the blessing of Ellen Beeson's family, they exhumed her remains in 2012. So her remains were again examined by Dr. Gil King and Dr. Kraus, confirming again that her case was a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the skull. So authorities brought Clyde Hedrick in for questioning in 2013, but he never confessed to the murder of Ellen Beeson. He stuck with his original story, which was that she drowned, he panicked, then he dumped her body. According to a fellow inmate, however, Clyde told him that on the night of her disappearance, Ellen had come to when Clyde placed her in the back of his truck.
Shut up.
Yeah, so she wasn't dead from drowning, so he claimed. So Clyde then panicked, hit her on the head with a table leg, and killed her. So obviously you can't see what we're looking at right now, but if you pull up pictures of Ellen's skull, you would see a large fracture, and with that type of fracture, you would definitely had to have been hit with some force behind it. Unfortunately, we will never know if this actually happened after the first examination or if it was there when the first exam took place. So at this point, it's he said, she said, one doctor versus another. So, a lot of different times we'll see that the jailhouse confessions rarely hold up, and that's because of obvious factors. Some people lie, so will just want to cut down on their sentence. They do not hold much clout whenever it comes to the actual sentencing. Yeah. So, because we see that, they hardly hold up in the courtroom without collaborating evidence, and that's the case here as well. This, mixed with the conflicting medical examination reports, made prosecutors hold off on charging Clyde with murder for years. However, finally, in 2014, investigators got an arrest warrant and they were able to charge Clyde with the murder of Ellen Beeson. So, we're talking almost 40 years after the fact.
If you think about it, yes, that's a long ass time for a family to officially get closure and justice. But at the same time, whenever looking at this case, you see so many families who never got closure and who never got to see someone convicted for the death of their loved one. So while it's a long time to wait, it's something to be super grateful for because so many others still don't have it and they may not get it.
Yep. So, it's basically as long as our older sister has been alive.
It sure is. It's almost as old as I am.
Boom, boom, boom. You're old. I'm not that old.
Don't let her fool y'all. She's talking like she's so much younger than Brittany and I, but she's not. She's a few years younger, and that's it. You're such a turd.
Anyways, but you're right. Like, it is a long, long time for someone who is seeking justice, seeking closure for them. And a lot of people don't get that. So they are very lucky. So going back, Tim Miller and several of Heidi's family members attended the trial. Through testimony that came out in the trial, Clyde's ex-wives and ex-girlfriends accused him of being very abusive and violent over the years, and he was actually accused of sexually assaulting one of his ex-wife's daughters, Marla. So his ex-wife said that she discovered a hole in Clyde's trailer wall that could look into Marla's bedroom.
Because nothing says normal behavior like drilling a peephole into your stepdaughter's bedroom wall. Gross. That is sick.
It's like every horror film's beginning.
I know, right?
Marla claimed that Clyde exposed himself to her while in a pool and that she woke up to him touching her chest. So this was reported to the local police at the time, but nothing was ever done. Marla also alleged that Clyde would give her Kool-Aid and she felt that it may have been drugged.
That poor girl.
Yep. So they never explicitly said that, but it was insinuated. Marla said that she would wake up the next day and her genitalias would be sore. So Marla also recalled a night that Clyde came home covered in blood, holding a bloody knife, and according to Marla, Clyde told her mother, quote, "I did it again." Marla testified at Clyde's trial, and she also claimed that she had been to Calder Roads in the 90s with Clyde when he was contracted to do a mowing job at a friend's property, and she witnessed Clyde digging in the Calder Road fields. So Clyde, of course, denied all of Marla's claims. So there was plenty of people who testified to the violent side of Clyde and portrayed him as a vicious predator. So, as the prosecution gathered evidence for Clyde's trial, they regrettably discovered that the medical examiner's office no longer had the file or the photographs from the original autopsy of Ellen Beeson.
So, yet again, another big ticket item goes missing here.
They did have the correspondence between examiners and photos that were taken during the later autopsies, but not the originals at this point. So basically, when the prosecutors went through the files, the original pictures of the skull were not in their designated spot in the file. So later, when prosecutors met with Dr. Korndorfer, the original medical examiner, he all of a sudden turned over the original pictures that were taken during the autopsy and claimed this was the only time he had ever taken a file back to his home.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
hmm So, during the trial, only two photos of Ellen's skull were submitted as evidence, and neither of them showed the fracture. So, the prosecutor, Kevin Petroff, he argued that the medical examiner, Dr. Korndorfer, either hid or destroyed the evidence. So this was never technically proven, and he retired before passing away in April of 2016. So ultimately, Clyde was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, but many people think that had the pictures from the second autopsy been shown, he may have gotten a little different conviction. So it would have been the corroborating evidence that the prosecution needed in order for the jailhouse confession to have any leverage. So he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison, which was the maximum sentence, but he only ended up serving 8. So he is now released as of October 2021 under mandatory supervision. So that being said, he was released on a technicality of mandatory release under a law that was in effect at the time of the murder. Then he went to live in a halfway house.
Man, so imagine how disappointing it was to be any of the family members of any of the victims. To find that information out after you already thought he was going to be spending the rest of his life behind bars, because at Clyde's age, whenever he got sentenced, it would have been the rest of his life if he actually was to serve the full 20 years that he was sentenced. And especially to hear that he was released because of a technicality of all the things, that's the absolute worst right there.
Well, somebody didn't do their job. Like, that's what it comes out to. Like, somebody messed up in their job, and now everybody's suffering for it. These victims' families were upset. They thought he would be spending the rest of his life behind bars, and here we are. He's walking the streets, he's in the halfway house, like, regardless of if he's following a program or not, like, that's just not how they envisioned justice for their loved one. So during the trial, prosecutor Kevin Pedroff included an interesting statement in the documents.
And it said,
This statement, because you asked, states notice of intent to use evidence of other crimes, wrong acts, or doings. So in this file, prosecutor said on September 10th of 1984, the defendant, Clyde Hedrick, had sex with Laura Miller and then intentionally and knowingly killed her. It also went on to state that he intentionally or knowingly killed Heidi, but Clyde, to this day, had not been charged with either of their murders. When Tim Miller came across this information and confronted the DA about it, he explained that his statement was based on statements that Clyde allegedly made while incarcerated to another inmate, but that under Texas law, a person cannot be convicted solely on a jailhouse informant. Here's a clip from KPRC2 True Crime docuseries, The Evidence Room of DA Kevin Pedroff, explaining why this statement was in the file, but Clyde was never charged with the murder and Texas law pertaining to this case.
Apparently, this episode happened in I guess, a communal area jail. So there were 3 people that overheard this conversation or Clyde giving this rant. So we had multiple people. Some were just not credible. My name is Kevin Petrov. I'm a former assistant district attorney at the Galveston County District Attorney's Office. Texas law is very suspicious of jailhouse informants, or as they're commonly known, jailhouse snitches. Basically, you cannot make a case based on that. You have to have to have enough corroborative evidence to show that the person charged was actually involved in the murder. One of the things that we do in preparing for trial is we've got to give notice to the defense of just every bad thing we've ever heard about. So most of the time that doesn't come in trial. That's not relevant, but it's something that puts the defense on notice. We did not have and still don't have corroborative evidence to support that jailhouse informant story of Clyde in any way being involved in Laura Miller's death.
so reading the document and hearing the explanation from the DA is very, very different, because the wording of the written document makes it sound like Clyde confessed. So I can understand any confusion that the written document caused.
So, as mentioned earlier, Clyde claimed he had no idea who Laura Miller was and claimed that he had never seen her before. But it was also later determined that Clyde was Miller's neighbor. Dun dun dun. So, He lived only 3 houses down from Miller's, and it was also found that Clyde had worked for a contractor on Calder Drive. So now, according to an old friend of Laura Miller's, she was actually afraid of Clyde and would avoid going by his house if she could. So Laura and her boyfriend Vernon would often walk to a nearby cemetery, and it was said that Clyde would whistle at her as they walked by. So Clyde saying, "Hey, I've never seen her." I don't know. Maybe he didn't recognize her, but I just find it really hard to believe after knowing that he was a neighbor, lived in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to believe that he's actually telling the truth about that.
Exactly. So, in October of 2021, when Clyde got released from jail, Tim Miller called on the media to hold a press conference, and families of the victims affected by this case were allowed to speak. So, I know there's a lot about all of these cases where we talk about how terrible of a job law enforcement did, but we do support law enforcement. But if you look back and you think about it, so many of these cases wouldn't have been solved or even looked into further by the police without Tim or, other family members of victims coming forward. I mean, I think that stands for anything. Like, if you have a loved one who has a certain diagnosis, like, it's okay to advocate and ask for more information, be their advocate. So in 2014, Tim Miller actually filed a wrongful death suit against Clyde Hedrick. And in July of 2022, he was awarded $24 million in that suit. And while that was absolutely a life changing amount of money, and it helps, I'm sure, but nothing compares to having been able to watch his daughter grow up. So Clyde was found civilly liable for Laura Miller's death. He was never charged criminally for her death or in any other cases. This is where Clyde's case pretty much just stops.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yep. So this brings us back to William Reese Lewis, or as we refer to him, Reese. If you remember, this is the man who was convicted of the kidnapping of Sandra Sapow. Well, in 2015, he was actually linked by DNA to the 1997 cold case murder of Tiffany Johnson in Oklahoma. So he was convicted and sentenced to death and later went on to confess to her murder. So this case alone shows how powerful DNA can be to any case, but especially to old cold cases, which makes me sick to think about how much DNA or potential DNA was lost throughout all of these cases here. So while Reese was on death row, he made a deal with law enforcement. He confessed to 3 more murders and agreed to share the remains of Kellyanne Cox and Jessica Kane to avoid the death penalty. He confessed to the following 3 murders: 12-year-old Laura Smithers, 20-year-old Kellyanne Cox, and 17-year-old Jessica Kane.
Okay, so that's 4 murders total right there that he is responsible for. He confessed to 3, and then he was linked to the 4th one by DNA. So that's 4 girls right there.
Reese claimed he committed his first murder on April 3rd, 1997, when he killed 12-year-old Laura Smithers in Friendswood. According to Reese, he accidentally hit Smithers with his car on a rainy day. He admitted to hiding Smithers' body in a lake and then later admitted to strangling her to death. However, he denied sexually assaulting her. He also confessed that on July 15th of 1997, he was driving from Oklahoma to Houston when he stopped to buy whiskey at a gas station in Denton, Texas. He claimed that he got into a physical confrontation with Kellyanne Cox and strangled her during the fight. Her remains were found when he led law enforcement to where she was buried in the woods in Brazoria County. And like the Smithers case, he insisted that Cox had not been sexually assaulted. Then later on, July 26th of 1997, Tiffany Johnson's Dodge Neon was found abandoned at the Sunshine Car Wash in Bethany, Oklahoma. Johnson's body was later found on the side of the road near I-40. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. And according to Reese's account, on July 26th of 1997, he stopped at the Sunshine Car Wash in Bethany to clean his truck and accidentally sprayed Johnson. Without witnesses, he grabbed the teenager and dragged her inside the trailer. Then he raped her at gunpoint.
He claimed that she got mad whenever he accidentally sprayed her and confronted him, and that when she confronted him, he was set off.
So Reese struck her over the head with a horseshoe and attacked her. So he admitted to strangling her and putting her body in the woods by the side of the road, where it was discovered the following day. Reese also stated that he knew Johnson's mother, Kathy Dobry, and she was an acquaintance of his mother and other members of the family. 17-year-old Jessica Kane was reported missing on August 17th of 1997. She was last seen after leaving Finnegan's in the Clear Lake City suburb of Houston, and her car was abandoned on the interstate later that day. So Reese claimed that he had approached her outside the restaurant. She rejected him and, not the kindest way, and that this just angered him. He then tailed her vehicle until she was forced to stop and confronted him. And when she did that, he admitted to beating and strangling her. So this is a clip of Laura Smithers' mom, Gay, talking about William Reese and the concept of forgiveness and how she forgives him and what that means to her.
He did not have to lead law enforcement to Jessica and Kelly's remains. Those girls could still be among the missing. So I wanted to thank him for doing the right thing finally. We all make mistakes. Yes, his are beyond mistakes, but that's what he did in the end was the right thing. And so it was important for me to say thank you to him for that and to let him know that I did forgive him. I was in such a prison of anger before I came to forgiveness. Forgiveness is very misunderstood. Forgiveness was really for me to let myself out of I was in such a prison of anger and rage about what had happened to our family. And through the sacrament of reconciliation, I came to that place, and I'm so grateful because I was literally eating myself from the inside out with cancer. And that allowed me to move forward. So I'm here today because of that.
The way she explains it really was beautifully put. Technically, he's still on death row, but does not have an execution date yet.
People go back and forth on if he really cared to give the families closure or if he only gave up that information to avoid the death penalty.
So, yeah, I agree. I think, he did it to avoid the death penalty. His attorney said that he really wanted to get it off his chest, but Tim Miller later had the chance to speak with Reese. And Tim basically asked him if he had any remorse, and he responded, "You'll never understand this, but people like me don't have remorse." So his direct statement to Tim actually conflicts with that of what, his attorney said.
Well, of course, his attorney says that. I mean, what else is he going to say?
Mhm. Well, and it's like one of those things, it's almost like a sadistic, like manipulative thing too, because like maybe he was telling his attorney the truth, but ultimately he wanted to hurt Tim. Making a statement like that, he knows it's going to get under his skin. I don't know what his true intentions were there. It's just interesting to me that his attorney's, saying this is the truth, the light, but then he turns around and says what he said to Tim Miller. Either way, Reese ended up being convicted of each of the 3 murders that he confessed to, and he was sentenced to life for each murder. So now we're going to come back to the Calder Road fields. Remember, there were 4 original cases,
Which were Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, Jane Doe, and Janet Doe.
and all of them were found in the Calder Road fields. Jane and Janet had not been identified in over 30 years. And like we discussed, they tried to use clay molds and sketches to recreate faces, but no one ever came forward to identify them. Fast forward to 2017. Now we have new techniques called genetics genealogy test, and they were conducted in an attempt to identify the 2 victims' remains. FBI agents claimed it was very difficult to convince the League City Police Department that the tests were worth it. Well, and you gotta think, like, those things cost money, and these departments are already running very limited resources, majority of them, to be honest. So, they said it took them over a year and a half to finally get them to run these tests. As we now see, it's what we needed to solve some of these cases.
Who would have ever thought that you could use science to solve a cold case, right?
Each test took an hour or less, and both women were successfully identified through family tree DNA. Jane Doe, hey, wait, hold on, back up. Didn't you do a family tree like a
I did. I used ancestry.com and it was really cool. I mean, I would recommend it for anyone who is interested in that. It was neat.
So Jane Doe was discovered to be 30-year-old Audrey Lee Cook from Memphis. She worked as a mechanic for a golf cart company in Houston. She loved fishing with her father and riding her dirt bike. She also moved to the area to work, and once again, it turned out that her family had been looking for her for years. Her mother knew something was seriously wrong when she didn't call home on Christmas Day of 1985. Her last known contact with family was actually December 17th of 1985. Her mom had written her a letter and mailed it to Audrey's last known address, but it was returned by the post office. Family members, especially her sister-in-law, tried to search for her for years to come, and they continued to come up with nothing. Now, this right here, just disclosure, extremely sad detail. By the time she was able to be identified, her mother, father, and brother had passed away.
Yeah, that's really heartbreaking.
This brings us now to Janet Doe. She ended up being 34-year-old Donna Prudhomme from Port Arthur, Texas. She had allegedly moved to the Houston area for work like so many others did. She loved to play board games and music, including Janis Joplin, ZZ Top, and then she also loved to fish. She was extremely close to her sister, Diane, and she was a mother of two at the time of her disappearance. She did have a substance abuse problem, and her family was aware when she went missing, but her sister, Diane, she continued to look for her. So, just real quick, this was another case where the police deemed the victim a runaway, when in reality, she did have people looking for her that loved her. And in 2008, Diane was still searching for Donna and contacted a local investigative journalist, Don Dodd, from the Examiner to see if he could find anything because obviously all the attempts to get the local police department on the case just wasn't working. Unfortunately, he was not able to find anything either. So it was at this point that for her own mental health, Diane she had to stop. She stopped looking for Donna and accepted that she was dead. 11 years later, she was notified by the League City Police that they had identified Donna as Janet Doe. While it's tragic news to hear, Diane did express that she felt some relief knowing that Donna didn't just walk out on her two kids. And she actually was quoted to say, "I've looked for her with detectives and everything, but to find out that she was just right here all of this time, it's really a lot of peace and a lot of healing for our family." Diane also found out later on that Donna's remains had not been properly preserved. Her fingernails had been clipped, but the clippings were lost. And an odd incident with the medical examiner, which was Korndorfer again. So he had issued 5 different death certificates, which later had to be amended into one saying that she died from a homicide. Diane believes that Clyde Hedrick is responsible for Donna's death and said that reportedly Donna's son remembers Clyde hanging around his mother during his childhood in Louisiana. Unfortunately, Donna's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance passed away just a few months before she was identified, so law enforcement never had the opportunity to interview him, and her case still remains open to this day. So, one suspect, Mark Rolandstallens, that's a tongue twister, y'all.
It really is.
Who is actually currently serving 2 life sentences for unrelated crimes, told author Catherine Casey that he killed Janet Doe in 1991 and went as far as to describe it in graphic detail. Catherine later published the book called Deliver Us, covering the Texas killing fields. She also took his admission to a forensic pathologist who said it was highly possible that Donna died in the same manner that Roland Stollens described. He also lived in League City near the homes of many of the victims, and allegedly he confessed while incarcerated to killing Donna. He has not been charged, but in 2021, he still remains a suspect in the case for both Donna Prudhomme and Audrey Cook. So, over the years, many men have been suspected of murders in the Texas killing fields. While some of them have faced charges, several other suspects and convicted killers remain closely connected to the cases in the area. In 1998, a man,
who some of you may already know,
Edward Bell, a convicted murderer serving 70 years for killing a Marine and then fleeing to Panama before becoming extradited, told prosecutors he had also killed 11 girls in 1970. He was unable to recall all of the victims' names, but they included a number of those found on the I-45 area.
some of his victims are believed to be Debbie Ackerman, Maria Johnson, Colette Wilson, Kimberly Pitchford, Rhonda Johnson, and Sharon Shaw.
But police could not connect him to any evidence in these crimes. So he remained a prime suspect, but was never charged for any of the Texas killing fields murders. He actually passed away in prison in 2019.
Now, we will do a full episode on Ed Bell, so we're going to save the deep dive for that one. But of course, I mean, you cannot talk about this case and not mention him.
Yeah. So in April of 2012, Kevin Edison Smith was arrested for the murder of 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker, 16 years after her body was discovered in March of 1996. She'd been beaten, raped, and strangled. Kevin was identified as the killer when an officer submitted Crystal's dress for DNA analysis, which came back to be a match to Kevin Smith, who had been arrested on a minor drug offense in 2010. That's when I graduated. 2010? Anyways, he was later convicted of the murder and sentenced to life in prison. In 1987, 30-year-old John Robert King contacted the El Paso police and confessed to killing 19-year-old Shelley Sykes while she was in her car.
Pause, please. Shout out to El Paso. This is actually where Taylor received a full scholarship from. She played volleyball for UTEP in El Paso, and that is where she graduated college with one of her degrees.
Yep, one of my degrees.
UTEP minors. Raise your pickaxes. Axe up.
Anyways, so going back to Shelley Sykes, she was last seen in her car leaving her job as a waitress on the glorious beachfront of Galveston.
Oh, yes. What a glorious beachfront Galveston, Texas has.
Texas beaches.
My point exactly.
So she left just before 12 a.m. on May 24th, 1986. John told police that he helped carry out the rape and murder with assistance from a man named Gerald Peter Swartz. Both men were arrested, and Gerald told police where he had hidden the body.
But unfortunately,
Shelley Sykes' remains have never been found. So both men in this case were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison in 1998. They were also both questioned about their involvement in other killings, but both men denied having any involvement. John King died in prison in October of 2015, and Gerald then died in November of 2020. In 1972, convicted sex offender Michael Lloyd Self became a suspect in the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. He confessed after hours of interrogation, but later recanted his confession, alleging he had been tortured into admitting to the murders by the police chief, Don Morris. In September of 1974, he was convicted of killing Sharon Shaw and sentenced to life in prison despite the credibility of his confession. 3 years later, Don Morris and his deputy, Tommy Dill, were actually arrested and convicted of several crimes themselves, including torture and misconduct against detainees. But still, Michael's attempts at the appeal failed, and he ended up dying in prison on December 21st of 2000.
So sad. And while I have you, just an interesting fact for our listeners. Don Morris's deputy, Tommy, actually did become a career criminal after this. Don and Tommy both robbed a few banks together, but the deputy, Tommy, he is actually still in prison today because he couldn't stop robbing banks.
It's crazy. So all this is, 16 years too late, but a number of police officials actually admitted their belief that he had been wrongly convicted. Furthermore, in recent years, many have brought attention to the forgotten victim of Texas killing fields, a 33-year-old newlywed Cheryl Martin. She was discovered in a drainage ditch under a League City bridge on November 3rd of 1989. Recently, detectives believe that they may have found the murder weapon used to strangle Cheryl. Her case is still unsolved, but DNA evidence may still be able to push her case forward. If you have any information, contact the Cold Case Unit at 281-338-8220 or email coldcase@leaguecitytx.
While some families have gotten answers, many others have not. Some are hoping that suspects will be held accountable.
Yeah. In 2023, there was a 4th annual memorial for the victims off Calder Road Fields. In that, you saw so many families who are still looking for their loved ones. FBI and local law enforcement are still working on open cases related to the murders and disappearances of primarily young women along the I-45 Houston to Galveston area. Seems to be more of a task force, but either way, they're still working on these cold cases and trying to solve them. I'm hoping that eventually we will have some updates to give in these cases later on down the road, but right now, that's where we're going to leave you.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Ryan Nix.
And I'm Taylor Lynch.
We'll see you next time.
And remember, it's not just true crime,
It's Pure Malice. The information shared in this podcast or on this website is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The host will not be held responsible for any misled interpretations of this content. The opinions and views expressed are those of the host and guest and should not be considered advice. We cannot guarantee the accuracy of any statements from guests or the sufficiency of the information. Are you ready to lose weight and keep it off? At Vital Flow Aesthetics and Wellness, we offer powerful, medically supervised weight loss solutions using semaglutide and tirzepatide, the same game-changing medications making headlines across the country. Our expert team will guide you every step of the way so you can achieve real results safely and confidently. Feel better, look better, live better. Call Vital Flow Aesthetics and Wellness today at 254-310-7131 and start your transformation. Vital Flow, where wellness meets results.